Just about 24 minutes after the hour of 6 o'clock. Welcome back to the Now Morning Show. Now, we are looking ahead to the budget day. Remember, the national budget will be read by the Minister of Finance, Colum Imbert, next Monday, September 26th. And joining me to talk more about his budget expectations for Tobago is Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, Mr. Farley Augustine. Mr. Augustine, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on Now.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Of course. Now, Mr. Augustine, before we jump into the conversation, I just have to ask you, how are you going? It's been a rough couple of days. How have you been keeping?
I have been keeping well considering the circumstances. And, I am one of those people that, believe firmly in the hand of God directing everything that happens and allowing things to happen and always providing a way out of any sort of trouble. And I think now that things are settling back down, I mean, it's unfortunate it has happened, especially so early in the government that I lead, but we are settling back down to a very progressive agenda and continuing on the pathway for progressive delivery.
Nice.
So I'm just grateful that things are boiling down nicely, like a good bhaji stew or a good callaloo.
Well,
so
a
it's
good
boiling
callaloo.
down nicely.
I love that comparison. Now, okay, so let's talk about that progressive agenda that you're talking about. Now, in June, Mr. Augustine, you'd have presented a $3.97 billion budget for Tobago. Now, given the fact that we're undergoing wage negotiations and the fact that the economy is still recovering, are you hopeful that you're going to get this allocation when the budget is read next Monday?
I'm hopeful that I will get most of what I asked for. May not be the $3.97 billion. In fact, in June, when I presented the budget, I pointed out some obvious observations. Number one, $3.97 billion is the smallest request Tobago is making in perhaps more than 10 years. Over the last 10 years or so, budgetary ask has been over $4 billion. And so this time, for the first time in more than 10 years, the ask is under $4 billion, which is a lot more realistic. Secondly, in June, I pointed out that I expected the national budget to be in and around $57 billion. And that prediction is based on the trajectory I've seen over the last 5 or so years and looking at the global economy and the national economy. Thirdly, we did, as a country, we did receive some excess revenues because of the rise in oil and gas prices. But because production levels in the energy sector have not been very high, it means that the amount of additional revenues we will collect will not be as much as we could have possibly collected. And you're right, given the demands from the labor organizations, from the government, from the state in particular, I expect there to be some tapering off. But I pointed out in June that one of the things Tobago has to do and get to doing very well in order to meet its demand for capital development must be that we have to find ways to raise revenues outside of the mandatory subvention that we receive as per the law, as per the Dispute Resolution Commission from the national budget yearly. We have to certainly raise monies independent of the budget line that comes through the central government.
Mr. Augustine,
I'm very hopeful.
Yeah, I know. I was just about to ask, as you're on the point, have you discussed with the THA executive what some of those revenue-generated activities are going to be as well?
Well, certainly. For starters, we are looking at how we could develop and expand the operations at the Stolly Park Enterprise Limited, which is our main quarry on the island. In fact, the mandate is to go beyond Stolly Park, perhaps even change the name and look at mining as a general revenue stream for Tobago. In fact, the demand out of Stolly Park at the moment exceeds our supply. And so there is a need for us to ramp up production there, given that Stolly Park produces the best quality aggregate material anywhere in the Caribbean region. And given the expansions we are seeing in Guyana, we do expect, in fact, we have been experiencing quite an increase in demand. Outside of Stolly Park, we are looking at how we can resuscitate our tourism sector. Tobago is a service-driven economy. The challenge we face with the tourism sector now, as in any service industry, has to be the movement of people. How do we get to moving people to and from the island? Connectivity to and from the island is a challenge, but that's a challenge we hope to overcome. In fact, we met just last week, Friday, with the CEO and chairman of Caribbean Airlines, and we are working together to see how we can provide some solutions in the short term, medium, and long term with regards to getting people to and from the island and solving the crisis we have in terms of moving people to and from the island.
Yes.
Thirdly, I've asked executive for us to consider alternative funding mechanisms. In other words, how can we fund some of the capital development projects we have without going through the traditional line, which is looking at our votes, looking at the monies we receive and saying, okay, how do we spend this? And there are some alternative lines. For example, we might require to have companies do some of the bill out for us, and we pay over time on terms, perhaps with some interest, minimal interest for some of these projects. The THA will also need to consider putting up some of its own resources, such as the land and marine resources, and saying, hey, come build the marina for us, hey, come build the hotels for us, or build this project for us. We have the land to invest as our shareholding in this experience, in this investment. You come with your money and you earn your profit off of your investment down the road. And
now,
Tobago is a shareholder from its land. So these alternatives are mechanisms that can be used to get some of the same outcomes without having all the monies upfront.
Yeah. Now, Mr. Augustine, going back to the budget presentation that you made in June, two divisions would have gotten huge chunks, or you would have tried to give them huge chunks in terms of the education and health. But you're mentioning land and the fact that Tobago has land. And as we move towards, food security for the region, I mean, what about the agricultural sector? Have you considered, how much would be allocated to things like ensuring that Tobago has a sustainable food sector for its citizens?
Almost certainly, although food security division is called a division of food security, and that was purposeful, although that division did not receive the largest or second largest division of the budget I proposed, we did propose quite a lot of landmark and progressive ideas for that division. One, we propose that we should get started on at least 2 megawatt commercial farms for the island. At present, we have none. Secondly, we have been looking at the area of agro-processing and how do we support that sector. And supporting that sector means that we have to invest, one, in laboratory services. Currently, all our agro-processors have to journey to Trinidad with their goods to get it tested so that we can meet necessary international standards. So for example, imagine having an ice cream company, indigenous ice cream company with an indigenous recipe. You have to ensure you get that ice cream to Trinidad in a dignified condition for it to be tested and all of that. Yes. So we're looking at laboratory services. We're also looking at building out a facility whereby small agro-processors can come into this singular shared space that meets all the necessary health and safety standards and international best practices and produce their goods and get the labeling done. Already, we are moving through our company that is called TATCO, and that's our agro-development company. And through that company, we are looking, in fact, in this coming month of October, to begin exporting our alternative flowers outside of Tobago. We got the Capital of Paradise, which is our main commercial fishing enterprise, back up and running. And that is attracting foreign currency as we export tunas and as we take the bycatch and we channel those through to our agro-processors again, those that are doing the smoked fish and some indigenous Tobago products with fish. And so out of the agriculture, and we just completed training exercises with our farmers. In fact, we brought some of our farmers to Trinidad that experienced some of the training, experienced the operations of commercial farming and so on, and looked at best practices that are needed so that they can maximize yield, maximize production, be more efficient. We have contract farming starting. So we have farmers that have signed the contracts with the THA, and that happened as recently about a week and a half ago. And these contracts are so that they can produce the amount of cassavas and root tubers that we need. And they have a commitment that we will take those root tubers from them so that we can produce the alternative flowers that we are producing. We have an active MOU with Novo Enterprise. And Novo has made quite a bit of waves recently, especially when we had the Agro Investment Forum recently held in Trinidad.
Yes.
But the THA has been having conversations with Novo long before even the central government realized how excellent their work has been. We have been in contact and in partnership with Novo Enterprise Limited. And so that sector is advancing because you're right, for us, the focus is not so much on just agriculture, but the issue of food security and food sovereignty. As we speak, we are expecting heavy rainfall, right? And gusty winds because we have some inclement weather coming our way. Imagine for a moment if something should happen to our main trading partner and our main trading ports out of Trinidad. It means that Tobago does not have access to consistent and quality foods because we don't have that food security pinned down quite as yet. And so we are looking to reverse that, and in reversing that, that will mean that our import-export imbalance, that too can be addressed. So all of those
Mr.
issues.
Augustine, I'm gonna ask to put a pin in that only because I have so many more questions for you. But one of the things as well that we're looking forward to, Parliament has resumed, and one of the things on the legislative agenda is the autonomy for Tobago. How does that factor in the budget that's going to be read next week, Monday?
Well, you know, as I look at the budget presentation I gave in the House, the theme of the budget was towards a smarter, greener, more autonomous Tobago. So in fact, in our budget presentation, we made preparation for a much more autonomous Tobago because we feel confidently so that in order for Tobago's economy to grow, Tobago has to have the legislative authority that will allow for significant development, socioeconomic and cultural development of this space. And when we say much more autonomy, a more autonomous Tobago, we're not talking about secession, but we're talking about a Tobago that has the ability in law to make certain decisions for itself. And let me give you simple examples. We, in November of 2019, before the very first THA election, you will appreciate last year we had two elections in a single calendar year because we had the 6-6 tie in January. The very last thing that we did as an assembly, the previous assembly, was to unanimously pass a motion, a bill that we sent down to Parliament in order for Tobago to develop its marine parks and have control over marine parks in the space, because we don't have the legislative authority so to do. Imagine that. If we want to set up a marine park and have the legislative powers over the marine park to legislate what happens in the marine park, we can't do it on our own, something as simple as a marine park. And we are saying, but if Tobago is actually going to be developing a very green economy, developing its blue economy, if it is we are going to maximize on our marine resources, if it is we are going to protect our marine space and that's a big seller for us in tourism. Tobago keeps winning these awards for ecotourism, but we can't protect our space because we just don't have the authority. That was since 2019. And would you believe that the Parliament is yet to pick up that bill that we sent down to Parliament is the Tobago Marine Parks Bill, yet to pick it up and treat with it? That's because Tobago is not really a priority for the central government in that regard. And I mean, I'm not knocking the central government per se, because
Well,
when
I
you
was
look
just
at the
about to
Trinidad
ask Mr.
space,
Augustine, but
we have
yes, continue.
bigger issues.
Yes.
You know, looking at issues of crime to deal with, and so the legislative agenda is filled with other things in order before making up as priority a marine park issue for Tobago, which seems insignificant in terms of the priority list for legislation for the country. But for us in Tobago, that is important because it's a part of our economic development. And so having a much more autonomous Tobago allows for us to readily make certain decisions that will advance the Tobago economy. And
now,
not only that,
Mr. Augustine, one of those decisions, one of those decisions, is there going to be opening up an office in Trinidad? Because I know people have been terming it embassy, but I know you don't like that word. So will part of the budget allocation as well be that office that you want to set up in Trinidad for Tobagonians who may reside here as well?
Yes, part of that bill out is setting up a Tobago House in Trinidad. And we are modeling it after the Scottish House that exists in London. And yes, Scotland is part of the country that is called the United Kingdom. And there is devolution of powers whereby Scotland, Wales, Ireland, they have certain powers afforded to them. In fact, they can make laws on their own accord. They collect their taxes, they manage most of their sectors outside of Westminster, and they do it locally in Scotland, in Cardiff, or Cardiff, which is in Wales, or in Edinburgh, which is in Scotland. And in fact, I have been to both the Welsh Senate, which is the Welsh Parliament, and the Scottish Parliament. I've been to Westminster. I've been there and I have studied closely in person the devolution of powers from Westminster to the outlying regions. And I've always argued that Trinidad and Tobago does not need to reinvent the wheel, because existing within the Commonwealth, we already have governance arrangements that allow for that kind of devolution of power, that allows for an island like Tobago to have much devolved and autonomous powers, while at the same time preserving the unity of the state as a whole. And that allows for significant economic development. And so, yes, having this Tobago outpost in Port of Spain allows not only for connection with Tobago's large diaspora that exists in Trinidad, and you will appreciate that there are more Tobagonians living in Trinidad than living on the island of Tobago. Tobago, perhaps in the Caribbean region, has the single largest outward migration rate. And so we have to find ways to connect with them, as we have been doing out in the tri-state area in the United States, across in Europe, across in Canada. We need to do the same in Trinidad, but not just to connect with the diaspora. They were talking about a Tobago outpost there that allows for marketing of the island, that allows for attracting investors. Imagine if an investor from in Trinidad not having to come to Tobago to really interact with the THA and to have its investment done, but can do so through Port of Spain. Imagine if you are a Tobago student in Trinidad, or you are a Tobagonian that have lived in Trinidad 10, 15 years because the public service has posted you in Trinidad and you have not been posted back to Tobago yet, and you need to get access to your government in Tobago and to have that kind of support. And you can do that through
the office in Trinidad that Tobago has set up.
And the reason why I don't use the term embassy, because embassy will suggest that we have seceded from the country that is Trinidad and Tobago. And so I'm very cautious about the term embassy.
I know, I have read that you make a very clear distinction.
But I don't use the term embassy for that purpose.
Yes. Of course, and of course, Mr. Augustine, I just have to ask. Now you are making the point that you want to have that office in Trinidad because you want the Tobagonian diaspora to be safe to go to that institution. But I know that formerly Mr. Duke would have said that he wanted to take local government elections in Trinidad, and you would have wished him the best in that endeavor. Is it that local government elections was never a focus for you while as the deputy political leader of the party?
As the former deputy political leader of the party, my focus was always what the party wanted to achieve. And one of the things the party considered carefully is the need to become national in perspective. And that's because that too helps in the debate and the strategy for a more autonomous Tobago. You would appreciate that the only strategy that Tobago has used for greater autonomy in the past has been sending down proposed bills to Parliament and hoping that it gets passed. We send it down to Parliament. The Parliament, whether it be PNM or UNC in charge, does what it wants with the proposal, brings it to Parliament, and then we have this huge public spat and debate happening across the waters between Trinidad and Tobago over what we want versus what the central government wants to give. And as a party, one of the things we consider closely is that politically, we may very well need to enter the Trinidad space so that we can shift the balance of power in the Parliament, which gives us far greater bargaining power within the national parliament so that we negotiate from a place of power. We are keenly aware that in order for us to have a more autonomous Tobago, we have to have a special majority in the national parliament voting for this new legislation, which will allow for revised Tobago House of Assembly. And in order for us to influence that balance of power, it may very well require that politically we step out of the Tobago space and challenge the status quo in Trinidad and saying, hey, we are here and we could fight out hard in Trinidad as well. Given that at this present moment, the PDP, given the last general election, is the third largest political party by number of votes in the entire country, larger than any of the other so-called third forces that exist in Trinidad. At this moment, for my government, we specifically are not going to be using our resources. And certainly, we have no intention of using government resources, that is for politicking in Port of Spain. That has to come out of the party's resources, not the government resources. There must be a clear distinction between the both. The government resources must be specific to solving the problems of the people of Tobago. That's where we are focused on as a government. The party issues, well, I'm guessing that the chairman of the party and or the political leader will be in a better position to articulate that strategy now, given that I'm just an ordinary member of the political party.
Just an ordinary member, you say. Just an ordinary member, you say, Mr. Augustine.
Just an ordinary member. But okay, as Chief Secretary and as leader of the executive of the Tobago Island government, I can tell you that the island government's resource will not be used and is not to be used for advancing the political ambition of the party, but really to advance the ambition of all of the people of Tobago, which will include invariably people who do not support my party politics. How do I advance their needs and their concerns in the Trinidad space?
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Augustine. We have so
outposts.
Yes.
It is not so much about the party but the government. Yes.
Mr. Augustine, we have so much more to discuss, but we're going to have to bring you back in because unfortunately we're out of time. But thank you so much for joining us. All the best to you in the future, Mr. Augustine. And I hope you have a great day. Be safe.
Thank you very much. Have a great day too.
We have so much more coming up. Stay with us.